part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. My name is Ben Billman and it is time for the start of college basketball season. Regular season games start tomorrow night. It's hard to believe we've made it. College football has dominated the landscape for the last couple of months, but here we are, the start of the regular season. I am really excited about this year, and in the first half of today's episode, I am going to be revealing the top 8 matchups that you definitely cannot miss leading up to Thanksgiving. And in the second half, I'm going to give you my top 16 teams, along with who I think is going to go to the Elite 8, the Final Four, and then on to be the national champion. But first, before I get into the best games before Thanksgiving, I do have to pay my respects to the head coach at the University of South Florida, Amir Abdur-Rahim. What he had done in just his first year as the head coach of the Bulls, going 25-8, winning the regular season conference championship in the American Athletic Conference. Unfortunately, they did not make it to the tournament, but they did go to the NIT, where they won a game there. But a coach and a program that looked to be on the rise in college basketball and in the AAC. Unfortunately, Amir Abdur-Rahim passed away after complications due to some procedures. It's a very sad story. He had a bright future. Just to remember, he was a 3-year coach at Kennesaw State, leading up to last year's position at South Florida. In 4 years at Kennesaw State, he took them from a 1-28 team in 2019-2020 all the way to an NCAA appearance in 22-23, winning the Atlantic Sun Conference Championship, immediately going to South Florida. What a remarkable career, and just a coach lost too soon, and a program and a coach that looked to be on the upward trajectory. Rest in peace to Coach Abdur-Rahim, and our thoughts and prayers with the South Florida program as they try to put together the pieces with an interim coach heading into the season that starts this week. So very unfortunate situation there for South Florida, but the games do get started tomorrow. We are on the verge of a great college basketball season with a lot of topics, a lot of exciting things that are going to happen during this season. The first few weeks of the season can be hit or miss. When you look at the top teams, they might sprinkle in a game or two against quality competition, but for the most part, you're going to have teams playing against lower level competition up until Thanksgiving break, and that's when we start to see the non-conference tournaments, such as the Maui Invitational. And I will talk about those non-conference Thanksgiving tournaments here in a future episode, but there are some very enticing matchups before we get to those November tournaments that I want to touch on. And I have picked out 8 matchups that are can't-miss matchups if you are a fan of college basketball. The first one, and we're kicking it off right from opening night, Monday, November 4th, we've got a top 10 matchup in Spokane, Washington, between number 6 Gonzaga and number 8 Baylor. Both of these teams have national championship aspirations. They both have very good guard depth. Both of these coaches have been to the Final Four. Scott Drew has won a national championship. Mark Few has finished runner-up twice now. Both these coaches know how to build a team and know what it takes to get to the last weekend in March. And they are beginning the season playing each other in the biggest matchup of the night. I think Gonzaga has what could be a home court advantage, even though they're not playing at their home court. They are playing in Spokane, and I think that's going to be a high-level game. It's going to be very close throughout the game, in my opinion. I think Gonzaga wins it to start off the season, but both of these teams, we could easily see this matchup as a game that we see in the Final Four in just a few months. So keep an eye on this, see how it plays out. On Friday, November 8th, a couple days later, the number one team in the country, the Kansas Jayhawks, will host number 9, North Carolina. Now, if you remember back, Roy Williams, the former coach at both schools, first at Kansas and then at North Carolina, there is a history there because of his coaching lineup at both of those schools. Well, now we have another top 10 matchup. Both these teams, just like that first matchup that I talked about with Gonzaga and Baylor, Kansas and North Carolina both have championship aspirations. And it wouldn't surprise me again to see this matchup deep in March Madness down the road. Now, Kansas has a lot riding on this game. Last year, they started preseason number 1, and they fumbled that away fairly quickly. North Carolina, on the other hand, was very good last year, and they have a lot of key returning players. This game is going to be built on returnees and which team has the better structure early on in the season. I think Bill Self has a slight coaching advantage in this game. I think Kansas will win, but this is going to give us a very good perspective early on how good Kansas really is. Now, my other big question with Kansas is that Hunter Dickinson sat out their exhibition game against Arkansas. I'm not terribly worried about that. I think that was more of a precautionary move with Hunter Dickinson, but is that something that is going to cause problems for them throughout the season? Being as big as he is, his skill around the rim and his shooting ability is going to make or break the Jayhawks season. So if he is not fully healthy and is not 100% going into this game against North Carolina, this could easily be an upset, and then the question becomes, can Kansas fully recover, especially knowing that their schedule in the Big 12 is going to be drastically tough. One of the toughest schedules, one of the best conferences, if not the best conference in the country. So that is the second of 8 games you must see if you're a college basketball fan before we get to Thanksgiving. Now, the day of the year in college basketball leading up to Thanksgiving is going to be Saturday, November 9th. There are 3 matchups on this day that are can't miss, beginning with number 12 Tennessee against Louisville, and this is in Louisville on their home court. Now, you might ask, why is this a big matchup? Well, the key to this one really comes down to Louisville. Their program was completely gutted from last year. Every single player transferred out. Every single piece of note is completely gone, and so they are completely starting from scratch this year. And so the question becomes, now with a whole new team, with a whole new culture and a new coach in Jeff Walz, how are they going to come out and produce in a year that is going to be so integral to the building of this program? Tennessee coming off an Elite 8 appearance, but they have lost multiple pieces to a team that went to the Elite 8 They are still ranked number 12 in the country, but it's going to be a real test against a roster full of transfers and freshmen in the Louisville Cardinals. I expect Tennessee to win this game, but this is a real chance for Louisville to make a statement early on to show that they are back and potentially be an NCAA tournament team, especially considering an ACC conference that they are a part of that I believe is pretty shallow when it comes to depth and success at the top. Louisville has a real chance to prove early that they belong in that top half of the ACC and are a contender for an NCAA tournament bid. Also on Saturday, November 11th, Baylor again makes an appearance on this list. Number 8 Baylor plays number 16 Arkansas. Anyone who follows college basketball knows that over the offseason, John Calipari made the jump from Kentucky to the Arkansas Razorbacks. And with him, the whole dynamic, the whole culture of college basketball changed. The coaching carousel that happened because of that was swift and drastic. And now Arkansas, full of transfers and freshmen, have a chance early on in the season to prove that what Coach Calipari did with that move was the right move for him, and that the roster he built is a credible threat in the nationwide scope of college basketball. This is the first real test for Arkansas. Baylor at this point will have already played Gonzaga, so they will have a quality opponent behind them. And the more exciting part of this is that the game is going to be taking place in Dallas. Now, this could provide a slight home court advantage for Baylor, but I think Arkansas is going to travel very well, especially since this will be the opening act for John Calipari in the Arkansas Red. I expect this game to be packed, sold out, great game, and I think that Arkansas will win this game because Coach Calipari will see this as the first opportunity to show that he has this program headed in a direction that could lead to a Final Four this year. I think, again, both of these teams have that opportunity to get to that level, and both of them, this will be a key game to show that on the national level. And then finally, on Saturday, November 9th, the third game that is a can't miss will be the number 4 Houston Cougars against the number 11 Auburn Tigers. Great matchup all around, defensively especially. Houston and Kelvin Sampson always have a great defensive approach. I don't think this year is going to be any different. The same with Auburn. I think they are going to be very tough defensively, especially with center Johnny Broome around the basket, and Bruce Pearl always has his team ready defensively. This could be a very low-scoring game. It still remains to be seen what happens, but I think both of these coaches have to think that this matchup will be key as they start to get ready for conference season. I still have a lot of questions about Houston. They do lose Jamal Shead. They're all-together best player last year. He did a little bit of everything for that team. So losing him could have major consequences, but they do start the season at number 4, and Kelvin Sampson is a coach that gets his players to play hard no matter who they are. I think Houston wins this game, but I think it's going to be very close, and both these teams, as I've said multiple times in all these games, both these teams have the Final Four in their sights as they go through this year. So Saturday, November 9th, make sure you're paying attention on that day. And then 3 more matchups to keep an eye on that are must-watch leading up to Thanksgiving. On Tuesday, November 12th, number 7 Duke against number 23 Kentucky in Atlanta, Georgia. This will be the first opportunity to see Cooper Flagg and the rest of the talented Duke Blue Devils going up against a quality opponent and also a completely revamped roster in Kentucky. Mark Pope takes over this program. He had to totally redo the whole system, the whole roster. Well, he has done that, and in my opinion, he's done an incredible job doing that. Well, now he goes up and takes that against John Shire and the Duke Blue Devils. And this should be an incredible game, a neutral court, so I don't think either team has an advantage when it comes to home court advantage. Duke fans and Kentucky fans, two of the best traveled fan bases in the country, so this game is going to be, in my opinion, 50-50 when it comes to the fan bases. It's going to be loud, it's going to be crazy, and it's going to determine a lot about where these two teams are early in the season. This is a can't miss, especially because of Cooper Flagg. This is his first chance to show that he belongs at the top and the number one consensus overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft. As of right now, that's where he is, and this game against Kentucky would be the great chance to continue that discussion and potentially put him in line for NCAA National Player of the Year if he has a good game against Kentucky. On Friday, November 15th, two teams that made it to the Final Four last year, number 2 Alabama and number 14 Purdue. Both teams made it to the Final Four. Purdue made it to the national championship, but Purdue now, without Zach Edey, the two-time National Player of the Year, how will they respond now with a completely different look to their team? Similar roster, but obviously the biggest piece is gone. Now the advantage they have in this game is that the game will be played in West Lafayette at Mackey Arena, the home court of the Purdue Boilermakers, so they do have that advantage. But roster-wise, I think Alabama has to think that they have the advantage there. This team riding high from last year's Final Four appearance and also getting Mark Sears back, another player that I think has to be thinking National Player of the Year, and an Alabama squad that, in my opinion, is the best team in the country going into this season. They can prove a lot if they can go into one of the best home courts in the country at Mackey Arena and knock off the Purdue Boilermakers. And if Purdue does lose this game, where does that put them heading in to December and then into conference play, having lost a close game to Alabama? That remains to be seen, but I am very nervous about Purdue heading into this season without Zach Edey. And then finally, the last game to watch before November and Thanksgiving hits. On Friday, November 22nd, number 7 Duke against number 10 Arizona. The second opportunity for Cooper Flagg to show his greatness and his ability to lead a team into hostile territory and win on Arizona's home court. This is also an opportunity for Caleb Love, who has beaten Duke multiple times as a member at North Carolina from a handful of years ago. Can he continue with his domination over the Duke Blue Devils roster and system? This game is a real chance for Arizona to get a quality win early, and they have to be aware that once they get to Big 12 play, it's going to be very tough to pick up victories. Arizona, we're going to be able to tell a lot from this game. A win here would probably be a step where you could consider them a Final Four team. A loss here, and it's going to put them into conference play with a big loss on their shoulders, going in against teams like Kansas, Houston, Iowa State in the Big 12. It just makes things a lot tougher for them, and I'd be very nervous if they lose a home game to Duke early in the season. So those are the 8 matchups to keep an eye on and are must watch if you're a college basketball fan before we get to Thanksgiving break. All right, in the second half, I will come back and I will discuss who I think will be the top 16 teams heading into the season, along with who I believe will make the Elite Eight, the Final Four, the National Championship, and then who I believe will be crowned the 24-25 NCAA National Champion.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
What's up everyone, I'm Holly Wetzel.
And I'm Tybus Powell.
And we are your hosts of the Orange is Oranger, a Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. We give you all the dog pound coverage that you'll need to get you through the regular season, hopeful postseason, and I'd say off-season, Tyvus, but is there really ever an off-season for this team?
Thankfully for our podcast, Holly, there really never is when it comes to the Cleveland Browns. Don't miss our breakdown of each week's matchup, game recaps, and any and all news out of Berea to feed your Browns appetite. As we know, Holly, dogs gotta eat.
Yes, they do. So hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode of the Orange is Oranger, Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the second half of the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. I am your host, Ben Billman, and if you missed the first half, I went over some of the best games to watch in the first few weeks of the NCAA college basketball season, leading up to the non-conference tournaments that always happen around Thanksgiving. And I will review some of those and preview some of those Thanksgiving tournaments as we get closer to that time. Those really are the kickoff of the season when we get to those matchups and those tournaments around Thanksgiving time. That's a really exciting time for college basketball. But in this second half, as I said already, tomorrow is the beginning of the NCAA college basketball season. We have so many different opinions on which teams are going to be doing well. The AP and the coaches polls are out there, and you can see those anywhere you look to get your college basketball information. Even some of the statistical polls like KenPom and the Massey ratings are out there that have their own predictions of who is going to do well and who potentially could be at the top at the end of the season. Myself, I have also made my own preseason predictions. I have made a top 50, but today I am going to key in on who I think will make the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight, the Final Four, and then closing it out with the National Championship and who I believe will be crowned the National Champion. So let me start with the Sweet 16. I'm going to list these 16 teams in alphabetical order, the teams that I believe will be there in the second weekend of March, and I'll say a little bit about some of them as we go through. First of all, Alabama, a Final Four team from last year, returning a lot of talent, and a team who I believe has a real shot to win the SEC championship. Second team would be Arizona, moving from the Pac-12, the now defunct Pac-12, to the Big 12. The winning will come harder for them, but the chances to advance farther in March may become easier because of the quality of competition heading into the tournament. The Auburn Tigers, Johnny Broome, will be first-team All-SEC, one of the best big men in the country, one of the best players that Bruce Pearl has had returning in quite a long time. They'll be near the top, if not at the top, of the SEC, and they're in my top 16 going into the Sweet 16 of the NCAA tournament. The Baylor Bears, another team out of the Big 12. Scott Drew has this team competing at a high level year after year. I don't think it will be any different this year, even though the Big 12 is going to be incredibly difficult with the depth of that conference. The Creighton Blue Jays, the first team I see making it out of the Big East. Creighton made the Sweet 16 last year, and I don't think it will be any different this year. Ryan Kalkbrenner, one of the best returning players in the country, I believe has a real good chance to be first-team All-American. He is that level of player, and with the depth that this team has, I believe they will be one of the top teams in the Big East, one of the top teams nationally, and at the start of the season, I believe they are a Sweet 16 team. The Duke Blue Devils. Anybody that doesn't have Duke in the top 16 at this point is foolish. With Cooper Flagg and the rest of this young, talented team, they are going to be a team to be reckoned with all season. Now the question becomes, will the youth catch up with Duke at some point during the year? Yes, Cooper Flagg is mightily talented, but this is also his first year in college, also his last year in college. Will he get tired? Will he start to look ahead to the NBA? That remains to be seen, but at this point, I don't think there's any way you can leave Duke out of the Sweet 16. The Gonzaga Bulldogs. They need to win non-conference games against quality opponents this year. Last year, that was a real struggle for them, and if it weren't for their West Coast Conference championship, it would have been real questionable whether or not they deserved a bid to the NCAA tournament. Well, this year, they have those opportunities again. They're by far the best team in the West Coast Conference, and I believe they will make it to the Sweet 16 and beyond. They're in my preseason top 16. The Houston Cougars, another team out of the Big 12. Kelvin Sampson, again, has a very veteran squad of guys that just know how to play together. They've been around together. And Kelvin Sampson is a coach that knows how to win, especially in conference. Houston, in my opinion, is a clear-cut top 16, Sweet 16 team heading into the season. The Illinois Fighting Illini. Last year, they made an appearance in the Elite Eight. They do lose a lot of talent from last year, but one thing we've learned about Illinois in recent years is their ability to match the depth, recover, and move on. And I believe Illinois will do that again this season. The Big Ten is wide open. I don't see any team in the Big Ten that is going to run away with the conference. And therefore, Illinois has just as good of a chance as anybody else in that conference. And they probably have a good chance to win the conference, even after losing so much talent from last season. So Illinois in the Sweet 16. Another Big 12 team, and you're going to see many Big 12 teams in this discussion today, but the Iowa State Cyclones. This is a team under TJ Otzelberger that has gotten better and better every year, and this is the deepest and the strongest and the most veteran-led team that he has had in his time in Ames, Iowa. Iowa State is going to be a great team. Now the question will become, once they get to conference season and they go up against so many quality teams in the Big 12, will they be able to hold it together? Their strength of schedule is going to be incredible, but will the amount of wins be able to match all the quality teams that they are going up against? Another Big 12 team, the Kansas Jayhawks, the preseason #1 team in the country, returning Hunter Dickinson, one of the best players in the country, one of the best big men in the country. Can Bill Self do what he failed to do last year and take the preseason #1 team on a deep run in March? If he does, this is the team to do it with so much returning talent and a handful of freshmen that I believe will come in and pay dividends right away. And I expect Kansas to be in the Sweet 16 and beyond moving in to this season. The Marquette Golden Eagles. What Shaka Smart has going there is very impressive, and this team is going to have a starting five that has as much experience as anyone else in the country. It's going to be a very tough team to beat just because of that fact alone. And also in the Big East, there are a handful of teams at the top, including the team that I already mentioned in Creighton. But I believe Marquette is going to challenge for a top 2 or 3 spot in the Big East. And they should be a team that is able to advance onto the Sweet 16 and potentially beyond in the NCAA tournament this year. The North Carolina Tar Heels, the second team in the ACC. I truly believe that the ACC is going to come down to Duke and North Carolina. Duke has the youth, they've got the depth, and they've got the excitement. North Carolina has the experience and the maturity, and that's going to be the key difference between those two teams. But I believe Hubert Davis has a team at North Carolina, especially with the leadership of R.J. Davis, to take this team deep in March, and without a doubt, they should be a Sweet 16 team, and maybe even more. The Purdue Boilermakers. Now, Purdue made the magical run all the way to the national championship game last year. They lose their key player, Zach Edey, but they return Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith and some other key pieces from that roster. Entering into the season, I think they're probably the favorite to win the Big Ten, but there are some real worries about this team when it comes to scoring and shooting. If they can answer those questions and overcome those early in the year, this is the Big Ten champion team right here. There's no question in my mind. And if that is who they are, then a second weekend appearance in the Sweet 16 should be no problem for Matt Painter and the Boilermakers. 2 more teams. The next team on the list, the Tennessee Volunteers. Tennessee returns a lot of talent from last year, including one of the best point guards in the country, Zakai Ziegler. But there are concerns with this roster. They do lose what many people consider the best player in the country outside of Zach Edey in Dalton Connect. Dalton has moved on to the Lakers and looks to be someone who could have a long, prosperous career in the NBA. But Rick Barnes has some rebuilding to do. They are still one of the best teams in the SEC. It's not out of the question for them to win the SEC, and there's no doubt in my mind that they will be around for the second weekend in March, making it to at least the Sweet 16. And then last but certainly not least, when it comes to teams that I believe will be in the Sweet 16 come March of 2025, and that is the 2-time national defending champions, the UConn Huskies. Danny Hurley loses a ton of talent from last year's team, but we've got to give him the benefit of the doubt when it comes to this team and their success. Caravan returns for this team, and they bring in a lot of key pieces from other schools and freshmen that I believe are going to make it very possible to see this team make it to potentially a 3rd straight Final Four, and it's possible a 3rd straight national championship, which would be the first time that a team has won back-to-back-to-back national championships since the great John Wooden succeeded in this feat back in the late 60s, early 70s with the UCLA Bruins. I would not bet against it. This is definitely the least talented of the 3 teams that he has had over the last 3 years. But how much does talent really matter when you have a system that is so successful and is just deadly when they go up against other programs? So Connecticut is my last team that I believe will advance to the Sweet 16. Okay, so moving on to the Elite 8. Now that I've listed off my Sweet 16, now these are the 8 teams from that list of 16 that I believe are just a little bit better, that will take the next step and move themselves one step closer to the Final Four. And those teams are, in alphabetical order, Alabama, Baylor, Duke, Gonzaga, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas, and UConn. Now, two of the key factors that I look at with these 8 teams, first of all, is coaching success. When I look at the coaches on this list, Alabama, been to a Final Four. Baylor, been to a Final Four. Duke, John Shire, went to the Elite Eight last year. Gonzaga, been to a handful of Final Fours. Houston, a handful of Final Fours. Kansas, UConn, Final Fours. And Iowa State has had success in recent years advancing in the tournament. So when you look at these 8 programs and the 8 coaches that lead them, that is the big difference maker that pushes them into this Elite 8 discussion. The other thing as well is a star player on these teams or star players that have either jumped into the NCAA basketball and the expectations are super high, or players that have been around for 3 or 4 years that are expected to be leaders, role models, and use that maturity to lead these teams. Now, especially with teams such as Baylor, where Scott Drew has fully gone a whole generation away from the national championship team he had in 2021. So these are all new players, which might affect them to an extent when it comes to NCAA tournament success. The same with Houston the last time they were in the Final Four. Whole new group of players. And even with Kansas, basically a whole new group of players from the last time they were there. And the same with Duke. So we are having a handful of teams in the Elite Eight with quality championship level coaches, but rosters that have been completely turned around from the last time these teams have made it to the Final Four or gotten close to the Final Four. So it's going to be very interesting here at the Elite 8 level to see what comes out on top. Is it going to be the youth and the excitement, or will it be the maturity and the depth and the experience of the upperclassmen? Okay, and now for my preseason Final Four. These are the 4 teams that I believe heading into the year have the best opportunity to make it to the last weekend of March Madness. And those 4 teams are Alabama, Duke, Iowa State, and Kansas. Alabama as the best team out of the SEC, and they will return to the Final Four for the 2nd straight year. Duke, after losing to NC State last year in the Elite Eight, gets over the hump, and Cooper Flagg becomes one of the best stories in Duke basketball history by leading the ACC champion Blue Devils to the Final Four. And then 2 teams out of the best conference in college basketball, the Big 12, the Iowa State Cyclones, who make their first appearance under TJ Otzelberger in the Final Four, a team that I believe gets it done based on depth and grit and the quality of the starting 5 in that program. And then finally, the Kansas Jayhawks. They have too much talent and too much experience with a championship-level head coach not to get to this level. And I believe that Kansas, after having a down year last year, will get back to the Final Four and make it this year in 24-25. So Alabama, Duke, Iowa State, and Kansas are my preseason prediction for the Final Four. Now, of those 4, the 2 teams that I believe will be playing for a national championship this year in college basketball will be the Alabama Crimson Tide and the Duke Blue Devils. What I see with these 2 teams, first of all, the coaching is phenomenal with both of these programs. Alabama, again, this will be their 2nd Final Four in a row, and this they'll advance a step further by making it to the national championship after last year losing to Connecticut in the Final Four. Alabama looks like they've got everything they need to make it to the national championship, including Mark Sears. This team is going to be a very tough out in March Madness, and I have them as the first team in the national championship. Followed up by Duke. This will be John Shire's party, and it will be his first opportunity post the Coach K era to show that he has what it takes to lead this Blue Devils program to the next level. It's going to be a matchup of Cooper Flagg versus Mark Sears. Those are going to be the two names to keep an eye on in this matchup. And at this time, I think this would be an amazing national championship game with experience, dedication, rookie sensations, freshmen that make huge key differences in these two programs. But at this point, preseason, my national champion will be the Alabama Crimson Tide. Coming through the SEC, I believe they are the best team in the SEC, and they will make a run all the way to a national championship. Now, heading out of this game, there are going to be a lot of people that say that Duke deserves to win it, that they have the best roster, and that they deserve to be the team at the top. But I believe in the end, the team that deserves to win the national championship is Alabama. And Nate Oates, Final Four last year, national championship this year, he will be considered one of the best coaches in college basketball after this season. Alabama, your national champion, 24-25. All right. Well, I appreciate you listening to that. I'd love to hear whether you agree, whether you disagree, or if there are teams I didn't even have in my Sweet 16 that you believe should have been there. I appreciate any sort of input you have, and I would love to debate and argue with those on those topics. But for now, enjoy the season. We get kicked off tomorrow. Should be a great year, and I will be back with another episode soon. Thank you for listening to the Press Play Podcast Network. To follow us on X, look up Press Play Pods. For sponsorship plans and more information, please email admin@pressplaypodcast.com. And to listen to all our shows and learn more about our network, please visit www.pressplaypodcasts.com.